Good evening. My name is Gabby Schuster, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. We would like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. Iowa State University is located on the ancestral lands and territory of the Bokodze or Iowa Nation. The United States obtained the land from the Saukee and Sauk nations in the Treaty of 1842. We wish to recognize our obligations to this land and to the people who took care of it, as well as to the 17,000 Native people who live in Iowa today. We would like to thank the sponsors for this evening's event: the Department of Human Development and Family Studies, the Committee on Lectures, funded by student government, as well as the Barbara E. Hansen Early Childhood Lecture Series Endowment Fund. A few housekeeping items. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the event. Please note that there is a microphone set up in the aisle for you to use. Please do not use a flash if you are taking pictures. If you leave before the Q&A is finished, please exit quietly and refrain from talking until you have left the room. A lectures program student worker will be in the lobby outside the room to scan your student IDs if you are here for class credit. Card scanning will not start until the lecture is finished. Finally, I'd like to briefly announce an upcoming event. On Tuesday, April 11th, curator and assistant professor at the Legacy Museum at Tuskegee University, Dr. Robinson, will give a lecture, Frederick Douglass, Patterson's America, Reimagining a Democracy, in celebration of the College of Veterinary Medicine's centennial graduation of Dr. Frederick Douglass Patterson, who was the fourth Black graduate of the Veterinarian College. Dr. Patterson went on to become the president of the Tuskegee Institute and was the founder of the United Negro College Fund. This talk will be at 6 p.m. in the Sunroom. All lecture events are free and open to the public. A full schedule is available on the lectures program website.
Thank you, Gabby, for getting us all started. Good evening. My name is Eileen Canifax, and I'm the director at the Iowa State University Child Development Lab School, as well as a member of the Hansen Lecture Committee. I don't know if there's any committee members in the audience and those that help participate. If you just stand for a moment. No? Thank you. Thank you for your contribution. As a member of the Department of Human Development and Family Studies and the Hansen Lecture Committee, I have the honor and privilege of introducing tonight's guest speaker, Dr. Jennifer Rosinia. Dr. Rosinia is not only a pioneer in the field of early care and education, but a true advocate for children. As a master clinician and gifted teacher, Dr. Rosinia has a special interest in the neurosciences, specifically sensory processing, the influence that stress and adverse experiences have on the developing child, as well as social emotional learning and the importance of relationships. As a senior instructor at the Erickson Institute in Chicago, she has guest lectured for many colleges and universities. Dr. Rosinia earned her master's degree in early childhood education and a doctorate in child development from Loyola University and the Erickson Institute. She is also a registered occupational therapist with over 35 years of experience in pediatrics and is currently the president of Kidlinks Unlimited Incorporated, a company whose mission is to link theory to practice, parents with professionals, and kids with their optimal potential. With a growing national reputation as a powerful speaker and consultant, Dr. Rosinia brings a healthy balance of humor, passion, and expertise to all of her presentations. Please give a warm Iowa State welcome to Dr. Jennifer Rosinia.
Wow, that's always hard to live up to. I was sitting there just thinking what a beautiful room this is and that view. Right? With like, I think you guys must have paid for students to be sitting on a blanket out there. You know, like it's so picturesque. It's absolutely beautiful. Well, I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm humbled to be here. It's always humbling to hear an introduction like that. This is a really important topic to me, and just mere hours ago, I was still putzing around trying to fix it, right? Because I think all of you know that when you're passionate about something and you're trying to put something together to communicate that passion, to put a fire under people to think differently, and to really just honor and respect what we've learned and what we know that can really be helpful, there's just that moment when you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to say? What do you want to hear? Like, why did you come tonight? Maybe you have to be here because your teacher told you. To that I say, you might be the best person to be here because you're not expecting anything. Like, what time do we, nice food, what time do we get out of here? But I want you to spend tonight just thinking about, and I hope you do ask me a lot of questions after it's over, just thinking about, what do you know? How do you know it? What do you do? Why do you do it? What do you believe about young children and their families? And then, of course, with my topic tonight, where does this neuroscience fit into your work? Now, if you're like my students, and I teach graduate students, I have some that'll say, that's not my thing. To which I usually reply, we live inside a body. How can that not be your thing? Little children, right, have little bodies. And those little bodies are driven by their nervous system. So it has to be your thing. I don't care if you're into cognition or whatever your specialty areas are, it has to be your thing, whether you realize it or not. And then, to make things more, what a title. It's almost a sexy title to some people. Ooh, the neuroscience basis of trauma-informed. It's like, what did I bite off? Because trauma-informed care right now is all the rage. Let's just be really clear. Is there anyone in this room that has not yet heard the words trauma-informed care? Is this like the first time anybody's hearing it for the first time? I doubt it. Because right now, everyone's saying it, and I'm worried that we're saying it so much that it's losing its power. Do you know how that works sometimes when you overhear something over and over and over and over? So I want us to just pause tonight and have a little bit of time to consider what all this means. And so to that end, I tell you a little bit like my introduction is that I am an occupational therapist. I have a master's degree in early childhood education, and I have a doctorate in child development. So I'm a different kind of OT. But I'm going to also tell you that tonight, like all of you, I'm a child development specialist. I am an early childhood professional. So we're not that big of a group, so let's do a quick, how many in this room are parents of human children? Not to say human children, because I know some of us. And how many of you have kids who are developing just a little bit differently? Right? Let's be honest, every single one of you that had your hands up should have them up anyway, right? Because all kids, the individual differences. And then how many of you work here at the university in some capacities? We have a lot of university people. And then where's my students? Hello, students. And then where's my outliers? You're a friend of somebody, a boyfriend who got dragged. Love will do the most wonderful things, right? And what did you, like, why are you here?
I just saw it on the Iowa State events, and I'm supposed to be in the other room for my criminal justice IP theft presentation.
Oh, more. This is much more. Go get the rest. Go get the rest of them. Yeah. Good on you. Good on you. Know what? Can you catch? Because I can't throw. Here you go. Thanks for that. Have a brain. It's a stress ball. There you go. Oh, she gives free things away. Now it's interesting. Anybody else here? Like, yeah.
I'm actually an attorney, and so in the family law area, I thought this would be interesting to learn more about.
Oh, so you should get a brain too. But I think I'm gonna give you something different. No, because I love giving crap away. Because it makes me smile. Here's a smile pin. So in all that heavy duty work that you do, you can clip it onto something and then you'll be, yeah. You're welcome. I love giving things away. So I should probably start because I don't think that people came to hear me just prattle on. But this is what you're going to get. I like to be informal and I like to, so let's see if I can actually change the slide though. There you go. Hello. So throughout the presentation, everything will be based on research or literature or books or the science, except for when it's not. And typically that's when I'll identify it as a Jennifer-ism. And so there's a few Jennifer-isms, and even though I didn't put it on this slide, which I probably should have, this is one of my favorite sayings. And it really does come from someone named Dr. Sally Provence. But here's what needs to be our lead card tonight. Our job is not to simplify. Our job is to embrace complexity. Isn't that a nifty little saying? And so just when we want to go, oh, I know why she's acting a fool, right? I know why he's doing that. The question is, do we really? And so for those of us that work with young children, take care of young children, are parenting young children, we typically look at them and go, what is going, why did you do that? Like why? What's going on there? And so our job is to embrace complexity. And so tonight, we get to think about trauma. Wasn't that a fun topic? where we get to think about stress. We get to think about the ways in which those impact the nervous system. And to that end, I have to tell you a story. I was just invited to a dinner party like a week or two ago. And I'm sitting there with like a handful of people. Most of them I did not know. A couple of them I knew casually. So it was a kind of a fun evening. And this one woman asked me questions because she knows what I do. And she's like, I want to talk to you about this kid. I'm consulting with his family, blah, blah, blah. She's a therapist. And this other woman's head whipped around and she goes, it just sounds like he's spoiled. We kind of all looked at each other uncomfortably. She goes, you know what? Life is hard, and the sooner they learn how hard life is, and as soon as they get a little bit of a callus to them, they'll be fine. I said, you don't really believe that, do you? I was like, kind of, ha ha ha. It's a dinner party, for goodness sake. And she's like, no, seriously, I think the world is getting too soft on children. All this touchy-feely stuff, and I'm like, you forget that there are still a lot of people in this world that believe that we have to be tough. We have to teach them. It's the school of hard knocks. And she went on and on and on pretty much for the rest of the evening, challenging me, going, so what do you think we should do? What if he refuses to go to school? Huh? How are you going to handle that? Well, I'm all about complexity. There's no one answer. The whole it depends, where I teach, we say it depends an awful lot. But I was reminded the importance of what we'll learn tonight, what we'll learn tomorrow, and how we have to get out there and advocate for young children, because what we know is that bad experiences are bad for the brain. Like, there's your big idea, right? You know, stress is not good for the brain if it's high levels of stress for long periods of time. Adverse experiences literally changes the architecture of the brain. And so to that end tonight, I want to talk about, that all behavior has meaning. It's our job to figure it out. And specifically tonight, we'll be looking at this trauma-informed lens. But there's many different lenses and many different ways in which we can work, treat, care for, think about young children in the context of their families and the community, and we do all those external concentric circles. But I want to be authentic to myself, because the other piece of this work I am finding, and I know tonight we have researchers in the room. We have people who are also understanding the neuroscience from a variety of perspectives. This is not a simple topic. And so as I start off, I want to make sure that I lay the foundation that this complexity piece is really important. And the other important piece for me, if you've ever heard me talk before, which I'm in Iowa, so you probably have not, this is definitely a Jennifer-ism, and I hope this will be one of the things you'll take with you, because I've had so many people over decades come up to me years later and say, remember that gather and settle thing? I still use it. I'm like, awesome. As I take a deep breath, and I encourage you to do the same. Gather and settle to me asks the question, what does it take for you to be available for relationships and learning? Now, I want to make sure you see that I put relationships first, because I believe, we know that learning occurs in the context of a relationship. That's a huge aha, right? We know this. So what does it take for you? Is it a little something to eat, a little something to drink? Are you using your favorite writing utensil, those of you taking notes? Now, you know, people in our business, we're freaks about writing utensils. Let's just take a moment, because if we're given, right, if we're at a conference and they're giving away free pens, aren't you like, oh, that could be the one, right? We're so weird about it. So sometimes having your favorite writing utensil. For me, and I put it back here so I wouldn't drop it, but this is my socially appropriate way of sucking. Don't you like that line? I'm never far away from water. I love my water. It keeps me hydrated. I think it keeps my stomach full, which inhibits my nervous system, right? So that's pretty nifty. That's why it was back there. That's exactly why it was back there. So what does it take for you? Did you run potty one more time before we started? Because if you didn't, as soon as I said that, you're like, oh, Jennifer, seriously, why did you mention it? There's so many. Now, we typically know about environments where we teach. It's all about the creature comforts. How's that chair feeling on your backside? Is it warm in this room? Is it cold in this room? Right? I love getting course evaluations or evaluations for these kinds of talks, because people will talk about the food, the lighting, the chair, the temperature, right? And they don't even talk about, did the teacher know anything, until the very bottom of the evaluation. It's pretty funny. But that tells me that's important. So as you do some self-reflection, which I love to utilize self-reflection in my teaching, if you do some self-reflection at the beginning of this presentation and ask yourself this question, what does it take for me to gather and settle, to be available for relationships and learning? I'm going to take you right then to thinking about the kids. Because if it's true for us, it's even more true for the children. And the question becomes, to what extent do we afford children the same luxuries we afford ourselves? Right? Kind of interesting. Like, how often does a kid come in and they've got their little sweater on, their little coat on or whatever, and we're like, hi, let me take that from you. You know, we're going to put it in their cubby, or if they're holding a little toy or something, and we're like, oh, I'm so glad you brought that. And we're not trying to be aggressive. We don't want it to get lost or stolen. But what I want to do right now is say, you have a sweatshirt on, you have one, you have a coat on. I have some cubbies in the hall that I had somebody wheel in for me. So if you'll all please just take all of your stuff, except for things you're taking notes with. So your drinks and your coats and your bags, and put them in the cubbies for the duration of the presentation. Okay? How does that feel to you? Would you do it? Now, you know I'm messing around with you, so that's not real. But and sometimes I've actually really pushed it, like I told people like to pick up their stuff and take it. But it's like, that stuff is like an attachment thing to me, right? It's kind of like my stuff. I'm teaching the class, for goodness sake, and I've spread out, I've got my stuff everywhere. Like, I'm all of a sudden going to go in my book bag and pull something out to check. I mean, that's craziness. But to the extent to which we afford ourselves the same luxuries, and yet we don't for the children, and we start to add a trauma-informed lens to that, and we start to understand that neuroscience helps me to understand that sometimes kids need their stuff, just like we do. And sometimes when little kids say, oh, teacher, can I have a drink? And we're like sucking on our bottles of water, our cups of coffees, or our sodas. We're like, you know what, we're going to go down the hall in about 2 minutes, okay? Can you wait till? No, we're asking the highest level coping skills from the youngest among us, right? And so as we start to think about the neuroscience of trauma-informed care, the roots of it are really in this kind of self-reflection that if it's true for me, I know what I need. I know what I want. I know what makes me happy. I know what makes me nervous. I'm learning, even at my advanced age, new things I never knew before about myself. So it's never too late. But if it's true for us, why are we not affording children the same luxuries, if not more? Whoever told us we had to be hard on children and be tough to teach them, you know, the rules and the regulations and all that kind of stuff? So we want to throw that out into the mix tonight. But really, when I think about individual neurological variables, which is what Gather and Settle is all about, I'm also big on definitions. So let's look at a definition of trauma. Individual trauma results from an event or a series of events or a set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has a lasting adverse effect on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, spiritual, emotional well-being. Trauma, definition. There is not one accepted definition. So this one comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration. But it's interesting to me that there isn't one definition. And the reason why I picked this one is because of the complexity. You already know I like complexity. But also the fact that right now, because trauma seems to be a buzzword, and because we're talking about trauma-informed everything, people are like, oh my God, it was like so traumatizing. They ran out of French fries in the cafeteria. Well, is that really traumatizing? I guess because if it's individually received, I guess for anybody, even something like that might be. But we begin to look at these variables as being pretty significant, pretty toxic, definitely something that we need to take into consideration because it can happen at any time throughout the lifespan. Now, as early childhood people, we think about adverse childhood experiences. So how many of you have heard of the ACEs study? ACEs? Okay, so a bunch of you, but not everybody. Okay, so the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, I'll give you a quick background on it. I actually forget the dates. Who knows the date of it? Do you know the date of it? I don't even remember. It's quite a while ago now. You think I should know this? I don't. Sorry. Thank you. Oh, God, do you want a brain or a pin? What do you want? A brain? Want a brain? Because you knew something. Who said it? I'm throwing this at you. Ready? Here you go. Groovy. Okay, wow, you caught that really well. Okay, adverse childhood experiences study. Basically what was happening is this Dr. Fietti at Kaiser Permanente in California was working in this clinic where they were working with people who were morbidly obese. They put them on this very medically well-supervised diet. The cohort lost a ton of weight, and lo and behold, every single cohort had this little subset, whoop, gained the weight back. And like Dr. Fietti was like, what the heck's going on here? So we began to comb through their records, and lo and behold, he found that this cohort of people that gained their weight back shared these group of experiences in their childhood. And when we say adverse childhood experiences, the study looks from like birth to 18 years, so it's not just early childhood. And so out of that, he then partnered with Dr. Anda from the CDC, and the work has just taken off since then. But essentially what they found is that adverse childhood experiences, there's like these 10, you can look it up, there's like these 10 categories. I have them listed actually, but there's more than 10 up here, but they break down into 10 variables on the quiz or whatever they call it, the form. But what they found was that these adverse childhood experiences led to increased experiences of medical and psychological problems. Even if you never smoked a day in your life, you had a higher prevalence for pulmonary problems. It also led to behaviors that were somewhat seen to be like trying to self-medicate, if you will. So overeating, which is how the original study started, increased sex partners, drugs, alcohol abuse. It's a fascinating study, and I didn't plan to go too deep into it. But what we learn is that what happens in childhood doesn't stay in childhood. It goes with us for the rest of our life. And if you have, there's these 10 variables, and what they found was that almost everybody has at least one, which was pretty profound. Trauma, adverse experiences in childhood is relatively common, which is kind of hard to believe. And of course, it's dose specific, and so the more ACEs you have, the higher your percentage of having pretty difficult challenges in your life, both medical as well as emotional, psychological, is profound. Now, when you look at this list, and it's not as specific as the form, we ask ourselves, what about me? Again, using self-reflection. Where do I fall in this ACEs? Where do the kids with whom I work fall within this ACEs kind of work? And what we're beginning to think about, and not just recently, but for a while now, is that people who have these ACEs in their childhood, these adverse childhood experiences, especially 4 seems to be the magic number, 4 or more, we really need to rally around them. Because I know if I have this kid in my class, this kid in my child care center, and they have 4 or more ACEs, I know they have significant increased probability of developing respiratory challenges or substance abuse or suicidality goes up, right? And so we are trying to say, by using a trauma-informed lens to adverse childhood experiences, we can rally around and we can make changes. Because as Bruce Perry, who is a very big researcher in the world of trauma, his new book just came out with Oprah Winfrey. Anybody know what it's called? Not you. It's called What Happened to You? And we'll get to that question in a little bit. But he talks a lot about hope as a neurological concept. I love that he talks like that. Hope is a neurological concept. Otherwise, why do this work? It's not a Debbie Downer kind of work. It's really encouraging and exciting kinds of work. And so we look at trauma through the lens of 3 different E's. The first E is the event. So when discussing trauma, there are these 3 components. The first one is the event, the traumatic situation. The second one is the experience that someone emotionally responds, or how they emotionally respond. And the third is the effects, the long and short-term outcomes. This simplistic lens is highly individualized. Because if I think about an event that happened to me and my personal experience of it and the effects it has on my individual neurological system, might be very different than Eileen, having the exact same event happen to her. What her experience is within her nervous system and the effects it has on her. So this is where the work becomes complex, because not everyone will have the same experience or effects of the same event. And as an OT who's interested in sensory processing, I'll give you a great example. Finger paints. Now, a lot of you that are students in this class, you will have done or will do finger painting. It's smearing something on a piece of paper, right? For some children, when they walk in and they see the finger paints lined up on the counter, they might be like, oh, yeah, look at this, smear some stuff, right? Others might go, and within their nervous system, not even conscious, like, look at these people nodding, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm going to die. I'm pretty sure I'm going to die, right? If I have to touch that stuff, I'm pretty sure I'm going to die, right? And they're not really thinking that consciously, but their nervous system has such a reaction to touching things that they literally have a completely different experience than their friend next to them. And when I asked you about gathering and settling, it's the same thing. What does it take for you? Individual neurological differences become incredibly important in this work. So we can't overgeneralize our response. We can't think just because I have this reaction, you might or might not. Is this making some sense? I see a lot of you nodding. I see different people reacting, but I want to make sure that this kind of what seems to be prattling on is laying a foundation upon which we realize that the neurological basis of trauma-informed care must be individualized. That we can't just go, oh, I'm a trauma-informed person, and then I overgeneralize my response to everybody. It has to be finessed. It has to be subtle, right? Do anybody have a comment or a question at this moment about anything I've said so far? Or yeah?
So that child's reaction to like anxiety around that finger painting, would that be like a learned response?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that.
Or would that be something that they just, because you can't just like pick that up?
Well, I guess here's what I get to say, my favorite professor answer. We always say, it depends, right? Because it does depend. It could be learned. However, what we know is that for some children, they have what they call a tactile defensiveness. Their neurological system has developed in such a way from the time they were born that they just don't receive or experience touch the same way other people do. And so they literally have this reaction within their stress response system that is, this is dangerous, this is not okay, don't do it, don't do it. And so they literally have a neurophysiological reaction to touching things. Just like if I said to some people, okra, or the, look at her face, or the fuzz on a peach, or buttermilk, right? And people are like, ooh, I would never drink that. Why not? Have you ever had it? No, it just sounds terrible, right? So for some people, it actually is an individual neurological difference from birth. It's just who they are. But it's real. And so sometimes teachers, all you potential teachers, soon-to-be teachers, in the olden days we would think, oh, he just needs to touch it and he'll feel better. So we would take that precious little hand and shove it in the finger paint. And but then some kids would actually throw up, right? Or they would hit us. Oh, And then we would see that as bad behavior, when in actuality it was a neurological response to a tactile experience. So it's pretty interesting. And I think I was having a conversation, actually just at lunch today, with someone, that I'm actually of the opinion that there are a lot of people who are incarcerated who probably have sensory processing differences. And the world just wasn't very friendly to them. And so they had these behaviors that they've created to save themselves from the offensive world. Yeah?
Is that the idea of sensory deficit disorder?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's actually not sensory deficit, sensory processing disorder. Yeah, sensory processing disorder. Okay, so the whole idea around this idea of an event, an experience, and an effect adds to the story that I wanted to tell tonight. So I was supposed to talk about neurological foundations, neuroscience foundations, and so here we have a brain. Hello, brain. It's just cute, isn't it? And so we know that it's organized into, I like the way brains look. We know it's organized into lobes. We know the different things that we've learned. I want to point to if we were to kind of like almost pull off one hemisphere and look deep inside, this limbic system This limbic system we refer to it frequently as the emotional regulation system. And it is comprised of a number of interconnecting structures. And in particular, this is how you know you're a neuro nerd if you have a particular part of the brain. The amygdala, you see that little itty bitty almond shape? That plays a big role in trauma. It plays a big role in stress response. It plays, if the amygdala could talk, it would be like, are we going to live through this? You know, like, based on our experiences, are we going to live through this? Because if the answer is, I'm pretty sure we're not going to live through this, then they say that the amygdala is richly and reciprocally connected to many, if not most, areas of the brain. And it generates behavior essentially to keep you alive, right? And so this emotional regulation system that's primitive, that's deep inside our brain, literally makes a big difference in the ways in which people react to experiences that, like trauma, threat, stress. And yeah. It plays a role. I'm going to say it that way. Because embracing the complexity, right? But it certainly plays a role in that. Typically, when we think about fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, we think about the autonomic nervous system, which will come up in a minute, which is part of the nervous system, which, by the way, I want to make sure I say that. I am a big proponent. People used to say brain research, brain friendly, brain breaks. Yes, the brain is a big deal. However, what we really want to embrace, what I would like for you to walk away tonight, is embracing the nervous system. Because it's not just a brain in a beaker or on a platter. It's not just the brain. It's connected to the rest of the body. And so when you have a child in front of you who has frequent requests for drinks, I just use the drink example, frequent requests to go potty, I want you to go, because it could be, let's rule out medical causation, frequent requests for drinks, frequent requests to urinate, go potty. What could that indicate medically? What? Kidney function, diabetes, right? So we think diabetes. And by the way, we know that we're seeing diabetes with greater frequency in children these days. So we think about that. Frequent requests for drinks. Other people might be like, oh, he's just looking for attention. A trauma-informed lens, simplistically put, and I know many of you in this room that are therapists will be like, wow, she's oversimplifying. And the answer is yes, intentionally. But when someone says, oh, Jennifer, he's just looking for attention, my response is always, why don't you give it? Why are we holding that back? Cool, what's that? I know, right? So isn't that an interesting question? Because like if my partner came home after a long day, oh my God, I just need a hug. I am not going to say, I hugged you yesterday. Like, who would do that to somebody? Oh, I got an itch. Oh my gosh, I got an itch. Please, right there, I got a bug bite. I seem like I scratched your back a lot lately. Who would do that to somebody? So why are we taking these little bitty people and we go, they're just looking for attention? Well, then give it. I mean, it's really kind of that simple. And I would have you ask yourself, why are you not? How does that resonate? Does anybody want to comment about that or think it's crazy? Yeah.
So, I do daycare, which is why I'm here. And I have one who wants all the attention.
Yes.
So if I'm paying attention to someone else, he's in my face. So the whole, just give him the attention.
Yeah, kind of hard for you to hear that, isn't it? You're like, what about the rest of the kids?
I won't, but then I can't give anyone else.
Right. So what do we do with that?
That.
Why'd you let her in here? Just teasing. That's where we have to embrace the complexity. And the question becomes, instead of, see, this is why I was still working these crazy notes like hours ago still. This is where we change the question. Instead of saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing that? Why are you in my face? I gave you attention, right? Because it can be annoying. Let's be honest too. This can be difficult. Then we have to ask, what's happened to you? What's happened to you in your life that brings you to the point where you really need this attention? And how can I give it in a way that also allows for the other children? Can you be my helper? I mean, opening and expanding. See, this is the last slide. I'm going to say it now. I give up. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten, right? So if you want to get something, that you've never gotten before. You have to do something you've never done before. And so I think sometimes when I'm consulting with group care people, which is the hardest of the hard, anyone that's got a group of kids in front of them, is to really say, if you really believe he needs it, which is the first hurdle, because a lot of us will think, he's just doing it for attention, or he wants it, but he doesn't need it. Wants versus needs, big deal in our business. But if you're willing to entertain the idea that something's going on in his life that he really needs this, or something's currently going on in his life, and I'm guessing right now your brain's going, well, yeah, I know about the family, or I know, like, are you, right? You're doing that right now. You're thinking about parenting and family and story, the backstory. And if we're willing to just pause and think about backstory and try to figure out ways in which you can help him to feel special, him or her, to feel special and to feel loved and feel connected, how if I push him away or if I don't give it, it's going to make things worse because the messaging is your feelings don't matter, and we're re-traumatizing. And in a minute we'll talk about, that's what the goal is to not re-traumatize. But I want to honor that question because it's a very common question. You're not alone in that experience. And other people, maybe at the end I'll do this. Hold on, remind me. Because I would say we can actually open it up to this. I got this wonderful consulting group available to you, so we should be using them. Yeah?
I was just thinking that creates like a new, potentially harmful behavior.
What could?
Giving them, or like giving into the attention, could that create some problems?
Maybe. It's the way you look at it. I mean, I keep thinking those critical thoughts, right? Because it could be, but it might not be. And from a trauma-informed lens, we're going to say better to fall on the side of giving what people need and meeting needs and honoring where they're at than not. You going to say something too?
I was just going to say that if you give the attention but also redirect the behavior by rewarding them with the attention, but also stating, like, I'm going to give you attention now, but I do have to do such.
Perhaps, yeah. Or even the whole thing across the room, you kind of go, right? Or would you please hold this for me? Put this in your pocket. I'm going to come back get it later. There's so many strategies out there. Okay, so it's more than the brain. I've already said this. We talk about a neuroscience lens. Yes, the limbic system is in the brain. That's part of the central nervous system. It's absolutely, I'm not saying it's not about the brain, but really, that's a preserved brain, by the way. They don't really look like that in our heads. You can slice them like a roast beef. It's pretty interesting. Thanks, Jennifer. That's a great image. But really, the nervous system is connected throughout our body. And so that's why we see frequent needs to go potty. That's why we see inability to sit still. That's why we see things. So it's all about the nervous system and not about the brain. And so a placeholder, if we're embracing complexity, here's one of many schematics. You've probably seen a ton. The nervous system. Central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. So when we look at stress, we look at trauma, we look at through the lens of central nervous system, right, brain and spinal cord, but we also look at the peripheral nervous system, which is divided then into the autonomic and somatic. And if we follow the autonomic down, you know these words, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most of us have heard of fight or flight. But this is a normal part of our nervous system. This is not a bad thing, right? This is that thing that says, oh my gosh, did I forget to unplug this? Or this is that thing that says, I'm going to be late to my meeting. This is that part of us that, our stress response system in typical development is there exquisitely designed to keep us alive, to keep us staying on time, to do what we need to do. So we've got the parasympathetic that conserves energy and undertakes housekeeping. But we've got the sympathetic that mobilizes and expends energy to keep us alive. And it's a balancing act. Throughout our lives, we want the balancing act. I need my sympathetic branch of my autonomic nervous system to go, okay, wait a second, warnings that something's happening here. Are you running late? You're this, you're that. Or I especially like it's dark, it's cold, it's Chicago. And I just got done teaching my night class, and it's 9:30 at night, and I'm walking to the parking garage, and I hear footsteps behind me. Heart starts to race. I'm pitting up my shirt, have to go potty. My mouth gets dry. You know all of them, right? and your breathing becomes labored, and I'm holding my keys as if I'm going to be able to attack my attacker. Like, who am I kidding? But I'm ready, right? And then the parking security guard goes, Dr. Rosetti, have a good night. Thank you lots. And then I just go to my car, right? Or you walk in and you slip on a patch of ice, and the first thing you do is look around to see if somebody saw you, because that makes it that much worse, right? But heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. This is autonomic nervous system. But imagine if you're slipping on ice all day long at school. Imagine if you're hearing footsteps behind you or feel the need to be vigilant all day long. Right? And we become sympathetic biased, that everything sets us off. For those that have experienced trauma in their lives, that's kind of what it's like. We talk about triggers and we talk about warnings because that's what it's like. And I like to use examples of that felt sense so that we can really understand what does it take to stress you out? What's threatening to you? You know, I would almost want to have you turn to your neighbor and tell them, but you may not know each other, right? But you know that feeling inside your body. And if we can get in touch with that felt sense, then we can be that much better of a practitioner. And so, more neuroscience foundations. Another big idea for tonight is that emotions are a function of the nervous system. Emotions are so powerful, they can override rational thinking and innate brain stem patterns. So we know in our brain stem, those of us that are neuroscience junkies, we know in our brain stem we house survival functions. Right? It's one of the things that's going on in there. So when you read those trashy novels, her heart skipped a beat. His stomach came up to his throat. He was paralyzed in fear, right? You know those things, right? That felt sense in our body, that's this. That's emotions are a function of the nervous system. Or you take a test, a job interview, you have the in-laws over for the first holiday meal, right? The boyfriend comes home, whatever, you go on a first date, your best friend calls you, how did you do? What they're really asking you is, did you screw up or not? Right? Because at times of high emotions, we don't tend to do our very best. An example of that I see frequently is when kids can identify the letters of their name. Oh, we're so proud of them. And then they're sitting in a circle time. I hate circle time. They're sitting in a circle time, and we ask them to stand up and walk across the circle to find their name on a felt board, and they can't do it. We're like, but you know, right? Like, I know one-on-one when it's a trusting relationship on the table, but don't ask me to stand up and having to walk. It's a very different experience. And so emotions are a function of the nervous system. They are so powerful they can override rational thinking. So I just mentioned that limbic system, specifically the amygdala, and we know if emotions are high, if my red flags are going off, if I have a trigger of some sort that you have no idea I even am having right now, the smell of my mother's perfume in a grocery store. She's been dead for many years. She's here. Not a good experience for me, right? And yet it's just somebody's perfume, but I'm having all kinds of reactions in a grocery store because the brain, the nervous system is so powerful. A smell, a sight, a sound, a touch, an experience of any sort. So for the purposes of tonight, I identified emotions as being important, but I've also thought about stress response system because it begins to unfold and lay that neuroscience foundation for trauma-informed care. So stress, again, go find a definition that everybody likes. Forget about it. I like Dr. Megan Gunner of the University of Minnesota. She says that it's a psychological and physiological response. So both brain and body, right? To actual or potential threats. That's what's really interesting, the potential piece. To psychological or physical well-being in the context of a certainty about one's capacity to cope or effectively manage the threat. Now, I didn't have time to include this tonight, but now here I'm saying it, so I guess I do have time. But there is some new research out there that's looking at decriminalizing stress, right? We've been demonizing it for so long, like taking that identity away. And what they're finding is if we can teach people to recognize that when my heart starts to beat, and my breathing becomes labored, and I am really hitting out my shirt and have to go potty, if I can say, this is my body, and it's amazing, and it's going to keep me alive, it's going to get me through. If I can rethink my stress response as being healthy, then I can cope and handle stress in ways that I couldn't before, because the neurophysiological reactions that we see is that the blood vessels, instead of constricting like we would see in a typical stress response, and for some people who have a lot of stress in their lives, that profile could lead to heart attacks and other kinds of bad health problems. Even though I'm experiencing a stressful event, if my belief that my body is capable of getting me through it, the profile of those vessels are more open. It's really fascinating stuff. So the belief that stress is bad for you is actually one of the leading causes of death, according to some of these studies. It actually is higher than some of the cancers. So when I talk about actual or potential, physical and psychological, but the lack of certainty that I can get through this. So here becomes trauma-informed care in its very beginnings for me. How do I help children and families recognize they're stronger than they think, they're more powerful than they think, that I am there for them, I am on their side, they've got an ally? How can I begin to help support people in their journey? Not that the stress isn't real, not that the trauma didn't happen, not taking any of that away, but to rethink, reframe, re-understand in the context of a trusting, consistent, predictable, nurturing relationship. I have those words written down later, but I want to say them again. Consistent, predictable, and nurturing. You got to have all three. The stress response is a normal, healthy part of our nervous system. And the stress response is this. The job of stress physiology is to deal with the current threat. So the question becomes, what's threatening? And one of the things I like to do when I'm consulting in classrooms, we can maybe even do this tomorrow, is I like to ask the question, what about, and you fill in the blank, what about this activity, this relationship, this time of day, this lighting, this temperature, this whatever, what about, fill in the blank, is causing this child to feel so unsafe that they're behaving in ways to save themselves? Does that make sense? It's a really interesting question you can ask in your own head. Like, what about this crazy pattern on my shirt that's visually disturbing? What about my perfume? What about this carpet? What about the lighting? What about fill in the blank? Is causing this child to feel so unsafe that they're behaving in ways to save themselves. So now when I see a child who is behaving, hitting, kicking, biting, screaming, trying to run away, which are all fight, flight, behavior type things, I might rethink that. I might ask myself, what about? And it changes the question. So the job of stress physiology is to deal with the current threat. What is the current threat becomes the question. And it may not be, it may be us. Wouldn't that be a kick, right? Like we don't get in the morning to threaten kids or make kids feel bad, but yet we don't know, am I just really too loud? Are my actions too big? Does my perfume remind you of? Embracing the complexity again. So processing stressful events in the brain, again, reminding us, limbic system. But this picture in particular highlights that prefrontal cortex because that's where we want to get to. The goal is to get to the cortex, to open the gate, to get us over there. Because what happens is that this amygdala, so we see the hippocampal region, learning memory, those of us working with young children, kind of our goal is to foster development, facilitate learning, right? But it's part of this limbic system, and the amygdala, this emotional regulation reactivity, little almond-shaped part of the brain, literally is a brain bandit. And so at times of high emotions, at times of stress and threat, traumatic experiences, literally that's the part of the brain that is activated, that save your life part of the brain. And not the let's think, let's use executive functions, let's problem solve, let's answer the questions about the book we just read. So the prefrontal cortex, where we have attention, concentration, and focus, is the goal. Right? That's where we're headed for. We want to get to the cortex. Y'all hanging in there with me? Okay, cool, good. Okay, so another piece of this puzzle that I want to make sure I introduce tonight is that there's this thing called the HPA system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal corticosteroid system. Something happens. The information goes up to the brain. And then this whole red alert system goes off. The hypothalamus goes, uh-oh, let's release some hormones. Let's trigger the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland goes, uh-oh, something's going on. Got to send some more hormonal messengers down to the adrenal gland, which is on top of your kidney. And the reason why I felt obligated to bring this slide up tonight is because a lot of us have heard about cortisol. Who knows what cortisol is? Yeah. It's a stress hormone. What else do we know about cortisol? Yeah. Absolutely. So it's a stress hormone. Too high a levels for too long period of time, not so good for us. Absolutely. There's supposed to be certain levels. It's supposed to rise in the morning when we wake up. It's like we thought it was the coffee. It's really the cortisol. Good morning. Helps me with information processing. Oh, Dr. Rosinia is coming tonight. I can't wait. Right? What are we going to do today? Eat a little something. And then throughout the day, it's supposed to go down. And then how many of us have had that, I couldn't get to sleep last night. I couldn't shut my brain off. You've been there before, right? Like you go to lay down and you're like worried about tomorrow or excited about tomorrow, and you just, because we've mounted another cortisol response. So cortisol, people have come to know it as a stress hormone. And people think it's produced by the brain, but it's not. It's produced as a result of this cascade of hormones. And it has to go through your body. Remember I said we have this body part of this puzzle to go to the adrenal gland that says, release cortisol, right? And so this is a longer acting stress response. Something could happen at home in the morning before they come to us. Something could happen on the ride to school. Something could happen while they're playing outside before they get let in the building. And so we begin to understand that there's this longer acting because it has to go to the brain, the hormone cascade has to happen, goes to the kidney, the adrenal gland on top of the kidney, releasing cortisol into the system that helps us gear up for the threat. So the stress response in our body, though, while it's really important and really good, also messes us up. It interferes with digestion. And for little kids, we know they can fall off their height, weight, and then head circumference growth curves. So kids who have high levels of stress for long periods of time, they could be eating really, really well, but their body's like, I'm sorry, I can't utilize this nutrition because I have to save you. I have to keep you alive. So they might get diarrhea, they might whatever. So digestion interferes with sleep, one of my new hot topics I'm fascinated with. Love the topic of sleep. None of us are getting nearly enough. Tissue repair. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't really know that much about this area, but where I live, where I used to work and do home visiting, it was some of the poorest, most violent neighborhoods in the country, actually. It was called Ford Heights, where people, one of my families would sleep in the bathtub because of the gunfire, right? And those communities would say this to us as home visitors: she keeps a cold. And when I heard a family say to me, she keeps a cold, it means she catches every germ and a bug that comes, that comes around. Or I would see scratches or bruises, and it seemed like they never healed. Because the body's like, at the stress response, I have to keep you alive. And at what cost? The cost becomes these things: tissue repair, immune function, and then, of course, physical growth. We do see kids falling off their growth curves. And lo and behold, exploratory play. And that's that safe envelope in which to explore that we talk a lot about, right? So we can connect this information, neuroscience information, to why little Johnny or little Susie or little Jennifer isn't exploring, why they're not playing, why they're hanging out by me. Maybe why they're hanging out with you, right? Maybe the need to be near you is more of a stress response. Whatever's happening, I don't feel safe enough to move away, even though it appears they do. So the alarm goes off, the stress hormones, and it changes a lot throughout our whole body. Now, maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't, but stress has been divided into 3 types: positive stress, tolerable, and toxic stress. So positive stress, that's that whole, if you study Vygotsky, that whole zone of proximal development, that whole wonderful, positive stress is like taking a risk. Someone asks you to do a talk in Iowa, and you're like, oh, sure, I'll do it, right? You take the stretch, right? Positive stretch. When the little kid stands up to take their first wobbly walks and they fall on their bottom, nothing cuter. Then they get back up again, right? Tolerable stress, which is really interesting. Positive and tolerable stress occur in the context of a consistent, predictable, nurturing relationship. That's what makes them different. Now, tolerable stress, those events could potentially make a difference within the nervous system, could disrupt brain architecture, but they don't typically, because you've got that significant, person there, that consistent, predictable, loving care provider there. That makes all the difference. When we look to toxic stress, which is some of the language we see with the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and some of the literature we see that lead into traumatic experiences are toxic stress experiences. And that's in the absence of having someone who's got your back. Toxic stress, one of the definition variables is you don't have in your life, that child does not have that consistent, predictable, nurturing care provider. And so what's happening is that the research on the biology of stress shows that high levels of stress for long periods of time literally disrupt the architecture of the brain, but they lead to stress management systems at lower thresholds. And the understanding thresholds, if I have a low threshold, I am hyper-reactive. Everything sets me off, right? So hyper-reactive, if it's a low threshold, I'm literally reinforcing neuronal connections that say, the world isn't safe, people can't be trusted, warning, warning, you can't learn, you can't relate, you can't have friends because you're too busy being vigilant. You're too busy staying alive. Everything sets you off. And so our job, of course, then within our work, from a trauma-informed perspective, if we know kids have had high levels of stress, long periods of time in the absence of this care provider, this consistent, predictable, nurturing care person, is to be that consistent, predictable, nurturing care person. Right? Don't we say in our business, every child needs at least one person who's crazy about them? Right? And it might be you. What an honor that is. What a great thing that is for the kids in our care. So here's, I just thought that was a cute picture, actually. So the architecture of the brain, literally, everything that we do, everything that we say, every activity we provide, everything the child experiences through all of their 8 sensory systems, yes, there are 8, literally sends signals to the brain telling it to grow. And of course, yes, it does begin in utero. Babies are born with, I always say newborn, prenatal experiences inform newborn expectations, right? And so literally we are growing the brain. And those first few years of life are critical. And I was sharing at lunchtime today with some of you this study that I heard that's still very profound, that if a child has their first year of life very traumatic, very, very traumatic experiences during that first year of life, but then they get some help and the parents get help, whatever, things get better at the end of the first year and the rest of their lives are looking pretty good. They are much more likely to have negative outcomes later in life than a child who'd had a great first year of life but then had the next many years really, really traumatic. So essentially what we're saying is that first year of life is so significant in development that it makes a difference if you have just the first year of life traumatic versus many years later after the first year. And so those of us that are interested in infants and toddlers, that level of work, we are literally in the business of growing brains. That's what we do for a living. There it is. I'll go back to the slide I just skipped. See, or the order of things. So isn't that cute? We are in the business of growing brains. That's what you do. That's what you do for a living. You thought you were a daycare provider, childcare provider. You thought you were a teacher, right? No. We are literally in the business of growing brains. And if you see it that way, through that lens, it might inform what you do, how you do it, we were joking also, I think, was it at lunch, about, let's be honest, people look at early childhood people like, oh, that's nice. You work with kids? That must be, it's a little bit, condescending, right? People kind of like roll their eyes, like, oh, what'd you play with today, right? And if we can say, people ask, what did you do for your day? What'd you do today? Well, I literally created some neuronal connections between the limbic system and the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex. What did you do? Like we have to recognize what a big deal we are. But the slide I skipped talks about this thing called the amygdala hijack, which is about the stress response system. Recognizing that this is real. If you want to go home and Google search something, go look up amygdala hijack. Because literally, that little almond-shaped portion of that limbic system is such a brain bandit that it will literally take and go and rob that frontal part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, of its ability to think clearly, to process, to learn in the service of survival. And so after the event is over, after you've taken a deep cleansing breath, you can literally have an amygdala hijack hangover for many hours afterwards. And I know that Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris does a lot of work around ACEs. She's a pediatrician. She's a mover and a shaker, written a couple of wonderful books. And she talks about this whole system, the stress response system, is so exquisitely designed to keep us alive that if we're out in the forest and there's a bear, we literally can run away, kick it or whatever, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We can literally save ourselves. And she says, that's wonderful if you're in the woods and there's a bear. But she says, what if the bear comes home every night? And that's when you go, whoa. How many of our kids have that bear coming home every night? Or what happens if right before they leave for school something tragic, traumatic happens? Oops. And then they come to us. And they're literally having had this amygdala hijack, and now they have the amygdala hijack hangover where they just can't answer questions, they can't do what they're told. It's real and it's significant. Oh, look, there's a brain. So I don't know why I did this, but I wanted you to see that's the one that's preserved, the top left, but that's what it looks like when it comes out of the head. I mean, I just felt that you should see it because too many of us see the preserved one, but it's really just delicate and luscious and rich and wonderful. And why this information is a big deal is because we have the technology. We have the technology to see inside the living brain. We have the technology to watch thinking take place. We have the technology to see what parts of our brain light up when we're experiencing different things, when we're experiencing different emotions. And we actually have, look at that little girl on the left-hand side there. Like we actually have these wonderful imaging machines now where kids have a lot of degrees of freedom of motion. So they don't have to be like held down or whatever. And so we have the technology to see inside the living brain, and that's what's making this work such a big deal, and that's what's informing trauma-informed care. I promised this at lunch, and here it is. We have all these images, and they are profound, right? We look at the one, the colorful one, and we see that the most active parts are the ones that are lighting up with the reds and the yellows, and then we see the healthy, typical brain on the left-hand side, and then we see a child who's experienced abuse, and the PET scan shows, clearly demonstrating that the parts of the brain are just not as active, just not as developed, right? And then we see on the other side, this is from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, and it's kind of, oh, look at 1997. This stuff is not that new. What's taking us so long to get our act together and use the science? What's taking us so long? So here we have, I love when they say normal. Like I don't think many people in our business like that word anymore, but the typical brain and a child who's experienced severe neglect, extreme neglect, before we were using the words, like traumatic experiences. Extreme neglect is a form of a traumatic experience. And literally, the brain just doesn't grow. Literally, the size is different. And so I wanted to also make sure we had the placeholder. Do you like my little friend up there? I love that picture. Okay, we'll talk about it. We talked about the brain, talked about the limbic system, that central nervous system. This autonomic nervous system, to me, makes you a magician. Either you're teaching a class on observation or you're taking a class on observation. This understanding autonomic nervous system variables of stress can really make you become an observable, magician. But I have to look here, because I'm also a person who cares about practice, and I am watching time. Eileen, is okay? We're doing okay? I have two questions for you about my friend here. Do you think he means that? He's giving the finger, right? Does he mean it? No. How many say no? How many say, yes, he does? Anybody want to say, yes, he does mean that gesture? Yeah, thank you. Why do you think that? Why do you think that?
For him in that context, he absolutely.
What context? What context? Who are you? Why are you saying that? What's the context?
He's at a sports game. He hates the other team passionately.
He does. Catch. It's also learned behavior. Oh, you're blaming the parents. Perhaps. I told you I had two questions. First question, does he mean it? Absolutely he does, and thank you very much. Context, we're assuming he's at a sporting event. I'm going to use Vygotskian language just to sound smart. He's at a sporting event, and perhaps something has displeased him on the field. He has learned from more competent peers that at times of great displeasure, you elevate your middle finger. So, look at his face. Does he mean it? The answer is yes. Does he know what it means is the other question I have for you. And we hope that in that context he does it. Not in the same way that we adults might mean it if we were to do that, which none of us would ever do that. But I say this only because kids with whom we are working that have experienced trauma, that have bad behaviors, that are doing things and saying things, they may mean it, but they may not know what it means. Okay, I'm going to move quickly because I've over-prepared, but there you go. Great quote from Margaret Mead. The solution of all adult problems tomorrow depends in large measure upon the ways our children grow up today. So, development never starts with a clean slate. It happens to build on what happened earlier. We're not getting kids in our work with clean slates, nor are we getting families. Nor we as graduate professors, teachers in colleges are getting our students with clean slates. No one has a clean slate. It always builds on what happens earlier, and I wanted to make sure, if I didn't remember to say it, that it even begins prenatally. Because we know the stress hormones, maternal stress hormones do cross the placental barrier, and so babies in utero also have experienced stress hormones. So what does it mean to have trauma-informed care? So the Institute on Trauma and Trauma-Informed Care gives us this definition: the practice of understanding and making active consideration of the pervasive nature of trauma, promoting environments that foster healing instead of engaging in practices that re-traumatize. That in alone could have been the whole talk. It could have been. We didn't want it. We don't intend to re-traumatize, but I would ask you, as you go home and do self-reflection tonight, do we? Have we done something to re-traumatize someone? I would hope not. And yet, I wonder, I'm checking my notes real fast, and yet I wonder if we did, right? And so the trauma-informed care has 4 assumptions and 6 key principles. The 4 assumptions: we have to realize that trauma is much more widespread than any of us ever realized. We have to recognize the signs of trauma, autonomic nervous system variables of stress or threat. We have to recognize disengagement, dysregulation. We have to recognize what we might see. And then we have to respond to the trauma properly, right? We have to be sensitive and use practices that are aligned with the developmental level of that child, with the conditions and the situation. And then we have to resist future trauma by utilizing this trauma care approach. And that's really what it's all about, is to work hard to not be re-traumatizing. We're going to make mistakes, but let's try not to. Let's work, that should be our goal. And then the 6 key principles, I don't even need to read them all to you because of time, but the principles of trauma-informed care are here for you. And of course, safety is the first one. Physical safety, emotional safety, even spiritual safety comes up in the literature. So if you understand the neuroscience underlying trauma-informed care, it changes our question. And it's easy to go, what is wrong with you? Why are you doing that? Ugh. And we ask the question now, what's happened to you? What's happened to you in your early life? What happened to you this morning before you came? What happened last night? What's going on in your family? Like, what happened to you all of a sudden changes my heart, changes my head. And so the underlying neuroscience question changes for us. Oh, hello. I'm now going to give a trigger warning. I know I'm running a little bit late, but I'm up here, I get to do it. In a moment, I'm going to put a slide on the screen. Perhaps you've seen it before. It has colors, and it has the words of the colors written. Don't read the word. Don't read. Don't piss me off. Don't read the darn color. If you make a mistake, there's no certificate for you students. No class credit. That's it. Okay? The rest of you all, like, forget about it. You're going to, like, money's going to be taken out of your paychecks. I don't know. I'm making it up. But, okay, seriously, you're going to do it fast. You're going to do it loud. We're going to do it together. No mistakes. One person makes a mistake, we're going to start all over again. We're going to stay here till 10 o'clock until we get it right. Fast, loud, no mistakes. Don't you dare read. Don't read. Just say the color. On the count of 3. Ready? You going to do it? Ready? Nice and loud. I see you getting nervous. Don't mess up. Remember, I gave a trigger. Okay, here we go. Ready, get set, go. Green. Red. Faster. Louder. Don't. I'm watching you. No mistakes. Come on, people. You're pathetic. Oh, come. This is serious learning. There's no laughter. Quit. It's kind of fun to yell at you. This is called the Stroop test. Perhaps you've seen it before. It's a neuropsychological test. By telling you to do it fast and loud and not making mistakes, and clearly I didn't want to over-traumatize anybody, just a little bit. In the context of learning, it's okay. It was hard, right? It's hard. It's like, I can't, and the more you think about it, the more cortical it becomes, the more, but if I have us do it one more time together, and we all take that deep cleansing breath. We're going to go slow. No pressure. You make a mistake, have a good time laughing. It's funny. It's a fun exercise. We're going to do it slow. We're going to do it together. Y'all get your little credit for being here. No paychecks are going to be deducted or whatever. So on the count of 3, let's do it together with support. 1, 2, 3. Green. Isn't that fascinating? As silly of an activity as this was, with just that little bit of support, taking the pressure off, going slow, doing it together, you didn't make a mistake. So all behavior has meaning. It's our job to figure it out. We're the adults, we're the teachers, we're the parents. We've learned from the neurosciences, we've learned from trauma-informed care that kids will do well if they can. And if they can't, there may be a lagging skill or an unmet need. And I keep thinking about the little guy in childcare here because I always feel bad that I don't never give enough, like I don't support you enough, but that would be another way to think about it. Is there a lagging skill or an unmet need? Believing that children will do well if they can. And then we look to neuroplasticity, which I'm a big fan of neuroplasticity. The brain can change in important ways in response to experience. That's trauma-informed care. Those experiences must be well-timed, intensive, yet sensitive. That's where the trick becomes. Well-timed, intensive, yet sensitive. So we have to be really, really cautious that we understand that we may have to abandon the plan sometimes in our work, that we may have to go in a different door, that we may just have to sit and wait until we're invited in as opposed to pushing in. We can talk about this during the questions. So there's the language, consistent, predictable, nurturing. I know I've said it an awful lot tonight, and here's why. You got to have all 3. You got to have all 3. because you can be consistently and predictably mean, right? You can be consistently and predictably ugly, nasty. So we have to be consistent, predictable, and nurturing. I like the word loving, but we don't see it often in our business. I want to bring that forward. So I'm getting very close to the end. Hang in there, please. Do you recognize this picture? What's it from? It is The Wizard of Oz. Yay, you got it. So follow the yellow brick road. The house lands, somebody dies, the red slippers get given to this crazy girl, and she has to go on this adventure where her friends get taken apart by wild I mean, it's crazy. It's a crazy movie, right? And we get all the way to Oz, and she wants to go home. And what is she told? Oh, just click your heels 3 times. Well, you could have told me that back when this thing started. And I feel like the neuroscience is almost exactly like the Wizard of Oz. It's like at the end of the day, with all the findings we have, it just says be nice. Be nice, be kind, be generous, be willing to think the best of people. Change your questions. And so for me, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping in a room with a mosquito. Do you like that? I love that quote. It's an African proverb. You know that little itty-bitty bug can cause such havoc, right? And it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And so to that end, I finally come to the end, and we'll definitely have time, hope for some questions. And I've already said this to you. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. So if you want to get something you've never gotten before, perhaps you have to do something you've never done before. And that might be utilizing a trauma-informed lens. So I will officially end, and I guess we can open it to thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Anybody?
Yeah.
Have you ever had to testify as an expert witness?
Yes. Yes.
And do you ever speak to judges? And it's ironic to call it family law actually, because you should do family. But anyway, you ever speak to family law?
I would welcome the opportunity. I think we have to get the word out to other people. Like the fact that you're here, I want you to go home tonight and really think about. That's what I'm saying. But the fact that you're here and not where you're supposed to be open to why you actually came. There's something that pulled you in here. But we need to get the word out that there are alternative ways to understand behavior. Yeah. Oh, see, I could hear her before. Now you were there with the microphone.
I'm following directions.
You're good at very good thing. But we should talk. I think that we need to get the word out. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I was going to say, for trauma-informed care approach, do you think that even those children that do have severe behavioral issues and wind up more so getting thrown into behavioral health clinics and mental health hospitals, do you think that if there was more of a trauma-informed care practice on them earlier in their development, that they ultimately would have as severe behavioral deficits?
Yeah. I will also clarify this response. I am one of those eternally hopeful people. Like I wake up every morning and there's birds around my head going, this could be the day, right? So I remain hopeful. But I do believe that in my state, in the early intervention system, we say the sooner we start, the further they'll go. And given that research that I quoted, poorly by the way, I know, I didn't do a good job, but that showed that first year as being so important, that I think the more people that we can get the word out to about being consistent, predictable, and nurturing, about recognizing that trauma is not unusual, the more we can begin to utilize an approach that embraces and wraps its arms around this knowledge base, I do think we could potentially see kids, that was cool, wasn't it? We could potentially see kids not end up going down certain trajectories in their lives, for sure.
I only ask it because I just got hired for a job because I graduate in May working in
Congratulations.
Thank you. Working in the child and adolescent wing at a mental health hospital, and they were talking about how my number one goal is to make sure that I'm keeping the kids distracted and talking about their emotions so that they don't fight with each other.
Yeah. Some of the work, especially Bruce Perry and some of the other guys that are working with more adolescent populations, and tonight I focus more on early childhood, but some of the adolescent populations, what they're saying is that we have to talk about the hard stuff. That we really do. It's not just like keep them distracted, but literally sitting with, and I'm certainly not a trained therapist, and I know some of you in the room are, clinical psychologists and all, that sitting with people, adolescents, getting them to acknowledge and see and work through their trauma, as opposed to distracting and trying to override it. You mentioned the criminal justice system, but we know, I went to a conference for psychologists and clinical social workers, and they were like embracing the neurosciences as if it's the first time they've ever heard it. It's been around forever. The decade of the brain was the 1990s. What's taking us so long, right? So if we begin to recognize different paths, I believe we can actually heal trauma. You might always have a psychological limp, let's be honest. The older we get, the body remembers and retains things. It alters our trajectory as human beings in development. But I'm also really hopeful that the kinds of things we do, if we can work through that emotional regulation system to access the cortex, some pretty magical things can happen. Anybody else, comments, thoughts, questions? I see two of you at one time. Go ahead.
DHS, no, I'm all right, thanks.
Okay.
It's a little intimidating. If DHS works with or does this class, so my daughter's 14, she has a friend who, rough life, lives with family members, and the DHS worker is rough. So she was sad, she went home, cried in her bed, kicked the wall. That was bad behavior, and she can't do that. And the DHS worker was like on her for acting this way. And I'm like, she's sad, she's a fucking teenager, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
But the DHS workers, anytime she would act out or get sad or do anything, it's like she's being naughty.
That's not an uncommon opinion that we have to help people change. I don't know about Iowa. I do know the Chicago Department of Children and Families that the workers, they're overly worked and stressed, but they are not well trained. They're not well prepared by any stretch of the imagination.
It's rough.
And it's rough. So they don't understand. Well, just like what you're bringing, you're staying in my mind because we have our work cut out for us to help people understand. But it's easier to think bad things and to punish than to sit with someone and work through it. That's much more time consuming. But the time we put in at this end will certainly be a payoff later. Imagine, just how horrible it is to imagine being so stressed that you put your fist or your foot through a wall and then getting in trouble for being distressed.
She didn't even put it through the wall. She just
Kicked it.
the wall.
Yeah. There's a lot of little kids that get put out of childcare. I've heard the most horrible words used about the youngest kids who've had childcare placements. They've been kicked out, or 2 or 3 of them, for bad behavior. So, yeah. You were going to also ask a question.
I don't personally have a question, but somebody had asked a question earlier that I was hoping we could circle back to.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about my students and I want them to hear the answer. Somebody had asked about if we provide a child with this attention, is that going to create a new, crutch or behavior that maybe is not desirable?
Yeah, you know what? The answer to that, thank you for bringing that back around. And so I always want to open the possibilities. Like, I guess something could happen from that. I'm going to open that. I don't believe it, because what we know is that if I give the attention and I let you know that I'm here for you, the consistent, predictable, nurturing approach actually helps kids kind of relax into that. And so giving attention doesn't cause a problem. It actually decreases the amount of, you may not believe it because of the kid you see in your care, but over time we've seen that if we give the attention, there's not this word of, I'm using spoiling because everyone uses it, right? You're not really spoiling the child. You're actually letting them know that someone is there, adults can be trusted, that we care, we see you, we hear you, and that messaging is worth its weight in gold. Do you want to say anything else about that as a teacher? Come on, what do you students want to hear? Tell me what you want them to hear.
So, a past colleague of mine always said something that really connected with me, and it's that you have to Maslow before you can bloom. You have to have those safety, physiological needs met before the child can learn, and that really gets to the point you were making about the hijacking everything. But to me, you know, even if you felt like, or maybe people were saying to you, this would develop a new behavior that you would have to change, the thing is it's still progress. We tend to, as adults, look at changing behavior as we just need to stop the behavior.
Yeah.
But there's scaffolding that has to take place. You know, very rarely, even us as adults, if we want to lose weight, stop eating ice cream at 9 p.m. Having babies will give that to you. We still can't just automatically stop a behavior. There's a process, there's steps. Otherwise, we're likely to fail. We're going to fall off the bandwagon, as you might say.
And again, this belief, this interesting research that's coming out that's saying the belief that and then this goes into some of the social emotional learning kinds of things and the mindfulness practices and really pausing and doing those kind of positive affirmations and really the belief that I've been doing some work looking at happiness, and so I want to send you all home with an assignment. You ready? And then tell your teachers about it. It's a really hard assignment. The next time you take a shower or a bath, I want you to smile a stupid smile the whole time you're doing it. Because the brain believes what the brain is told. So if I'm showering going, you know, I mean, even if you just do it now, like just to put on this big cheesy stupid smile, like your brain's going to go, we must be happy. And it's going to be a good day. If I wake up and go, oh, it's going to be a crappy day, then it's a crappy day. But if I go, you know, then your brain believes it. And so we actually, this messaging and this belief system, and then that happens also in the relationship. It's incremental, and it does make a difference. Yeah?
You said something about you don't want to re-traumatize in your line of work. I was just wondering about like IOP, so like intensive outpatient programs and stuff like that. I know you mentioned that the work has to be intense for it to like be effective, but can intense work be like not more traumatizing, but like
No, absolutely. I think
I
some outpatient therapy programs can be the worst place for people who've experienced trauma. I mean, there are some good ones for sure, but when I talked about neuroplasticity, that the brain can change in important ways, but it has to be well-timed, intense, but sensitive. So I can't pull one word out and say, intensive! No, it has to be well-timed, intensive, which means you get to see me, and then sensitive. And that sensitivity speaks to some of this trauma-informed work around being consistent and predictable and nurturing, right? So that the subtleties are really important here. And to pull one word out is almost dangerous, right? Like when I said consistent, predictable, nurturing, if you don't have nurturing, that could be consistently and predictably mean, and that would be re-traumatizing, right? Or always say, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? The messaging is something's clearly wrong with you, and you have to come up with an answer quickly, as opposed to what's happened to you. This really hard early life. Well, right now I'm going through something pretty terrible at home. How many kids come to us? I told the story earlier. I knew of a kid who the mama shot the daddy, and the daddy died, and they put him on the bus to come to school the next morning. And we as a staff didn't find out until the evening paper came out, and we're like, or no, someone found out before the school day, the treatment day was over. We don't know the lived experience of the kids in our care. We don't know the lived experience of the person you're sitting next to. Let's be nice. Let's be kind and generous and consider all possibilities. That's trauma-informed care. Not in a clinical way, but in just a global kind of wrapping our arms around the new way of thinking, or a new way of thinking. Other comments or thoughts or questions? Yeah?
One thing that strikes me is the metaphor that you used with the Wizard of Oz. The idea that you do all this research and then we come back to these simple answers. We're seeing across our society a lot of traumatizing events, mass traumas, COVID-19, epidemics of violence here in the United States, economic deprivation. For people who are not specifically involved in these fields working directly with kids, for the average person, what would you say would be the most effective way to employ some of these methods in the household, individually, your own families?
With your own family?
Anywhere. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, that's an easy question. Not. But a brilliant question, right? I mean, really an important question for all of us to really wrestle with. And again, I'm going to go back to I mean, as I started to tell you, I am not a researcher. I'm much more applied. I love to be a translator of complex theoretical philosophical information and make it just really hands-on. And so I think it's a willingness to believe what the person is telling us and showing us. Right? I think this willingness to believe that it's possible that something that didn't affect me affected you. It's possible to believe that all behavior has meaning and there's multiple ways to interpret what the meaning might be, right? Opening up to possibility. I think that for me, that would be a first line of defense. But I've created this lovely consultation group for you. Let's ask other people. How would you answer his question? Do you want to ask it again kind of in a very kind of succinct, quick way? And what are we going to do to collectively? This would be a great exercise.
It's more of just like, how do we employ, like what's a simple packaged way that we can employ these methods broadly so that way we don't have to stress it?
Listening to the child, like just like what they think and like how they're behaving and like observing it, and you see that they're necessarily struggling with something that they don't necessarily struggle with, asking them about it, but making sure that you're at their level and like doing it in words that don't overwhelm them, because sometimes they need play in order to get something else, but just showing that you're there and showing that you have trust in communication.
So being present, hearing, seeing.
Showing that you're like, you care.
Mm-hmm. Others. What else? What are some? We're going to put a package together here.
Well, when kids make comments about the things they've heard, either other kids or seen in the news and stuff, just say, to them, engage them in conversation, and ask, what have you heard? How do you feel about that?
How does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other things. Yeah.
I'd say always just be curious about them, just like always be interested in what they are thinking and always try to like learn their ways of thinking and their behaviors and coping skills and whatever.
Yeah.
Always be
Yes.
vigilant.
So I would follow up with the other part of it being, let them get it out. Sometimes we want to give them the answer, and sometimes even being honest, saying, I don't know. That honesty, I think, speaks volumes, instead of trying to fix how they're feeling.
I see your hand. I'm also going to add into that because one of the things I do a lot, and I never realized I did it until one of my colleagues, a mentor person, told me, is that a lot of times I'll put my hand to my chest and I'll be like I will feel it with you. I will see a tear in your eye. I will notice, and I'll just, in that moment, I'm connecting to you. And non-verbally, no answer. It's just we are here. We're together. We're together. And it's that however everyone does it individually. But many times I'll put my hand and I just kind of lean in, and that's just it comes natural to me to do that. Yeah.
I would say listen, validate, brainstorm, and then support them, whatever that is.
Look at her. Look, she's one of yours. Huh?
I know she is, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta give these people stuff. Yeah, I'll just throw brains at people. Here you go. I won't throw it that hard either. Do you get one? Yeah, here you go. Sir. Oh, see, I can't. Here you go. It's coming at you, so good luck. I'm not very good at throwing. You're not.
There you
Oh,
go.
there you go. Here you go. Who else have I heard from? You want one too? Here, what the heck? All right. What the heck? Excellent. What else? Hopefully that helps a little. What else? What else? Yeah, please.
I think a lot of what we talked about here too really needs to be looked at in a way that we can apply it to adults too. And I think a lot of, we talk about how the trauma follows with you throughout your entire life, not just happening in childhood, but it follows you. And so many adults have things that they're going through, but they don't know how to identify it. They don't know what to call it. They don't know how to cope. They may not. So, thinking about all of these things and applying it to children, well, we can do a lot of that with adults too.
Absolutely.
And with our coworkers, with our peers, with our friends, with our family. So just kind of having that as well.
How many other people besides me thought immediately of like the hospital workers during COVID? And how, that's the first group of people I thought about, like what their experiences were, right? Their adult experiences. if I was queen of the universe, it wouldn't be like child development. It'd be the human development experience. It'd be like human development, the childhood years, right? Like we're all connected. We don't just stop. Kids grow. I mean, we're such funny people. In early intervention, age 3, all of a sudden is seen as you're grown and you graduate from my services. At 3 years of age, right? I mean, 3 to 5-year-olds, they leave us and we're like, we forget that life goes on. They grow and they develop. We see them out in the mall and we're like, whoa, you're so big. But families and professionals, teachers, professors, students, this is for all of us. This neuroscience, it cuts across all of us, which is why it's so cool. Anything else? You guys have been, you're so attentive and you're listening. I'm so grateful for having all your, yes.
So I just have a comment about like the 3 E's of like trauma.
Yeah.
I really like about like the experience part of it, just because I've been told in my life, and I've heard other people tell other people in their life that, oh, you shouldn't feel this way because somebody's had it worse.
Yep.
But I've also like heard that just because somebody else has had it worse doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel a certain type of way, because everybody has different experiences. So I really like hearing that.
Yeah. Quit being so oh my gosh, let's go back to, let me have a little therapy session, my trauma, my childhood. Quit being so dramatic. So, we don't want to minimize someone's experience. If that's your experience, that's yours. You can't take that away from someone. If I don't want to touch finger paints, or I don't want to, hug my friend, you're right. Everyone's experience is highly individualized. That's what makes neurology so much fun. We all come into this world with our own set of individual neurological variables, and that's how we interact with the world. And honoring and respecting everyone's experience of an event would do us well, would do us good, right? For sure.
And I think that goes into sharing with your question, listening, like she said, because, and then, well, this is how I got to it. Trying to find a solution might not be the solution.
Some people don't want a solution. And I know with students that have come to me, I've learned I want to fix everything. I'm a therapist. I want to fix everything. I know my knee-jerk reaction. And I'll say, are you just needing someone to listen? Or would you like me to take this further? Right? And just even giving someone no, I just need to vent. I just listen to me. I just need someone to contain my anxiety or to hold me or whatever, create space. Sometimes that's enough to just know somebody's there and cares. I have a friend that lives really far from me, and she'll say things like, when you get home from class, text me. I want to know you're home. And that feels so, at first it sounds ridiculous, like, I'm a grown up. But, but it also feels really good to know that someone in the world knows I'm home. Right? We do that for each other. So I don't know if it's time probably to end. Any other questions? Or I'll tell you what, should we just go ahead and dismiss and I'll hang out?
Yeah.
All right, so I want to most sincerely thank you and tell you I'm very humbled and grateful for this experience, and I wish you all to go out and do good in the world. And on that note, I'll say good night, and I'll hang out.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question, a major question.